On August 28, 1910, President Theodore Roosevelt wrote a letter to John Lomax from Cheyenne, Wyoming. The letter was to be used as a preface in Lomax's book of cowboy songs. The letter said this: "You have done a work emphatically worth doing, and one which should appeal to the people of all our country, but particularly to the people of the West and Southwest. Your subject is not only exceedingly interesting to a student of literature, but also to a student of the general history of the West. There is something very curious in the reproduction here on this new continent of essentially the conditions of ballad growth which obtained in medieval England, including, by the way, sympathy for the outlaw, Jesse James taking the place of Robin Hood. Under modern conditions, however, the native ballad is speedily killed by competition with the music hall songs, the cowboys becoming ashamed to sing the crude homespun ballads in view of which Owen Wister calls the ill-smelling saloon cleverness of the far less interesting compositions of the music hall singers. It is therefore a work of real importance to preserve permanently this unwritten ballad literature of the back country and the frontier." Howdy, folks. This is Andy Hedges, and you're listening to Cowboy Crossroads. On each episode, I interview a different guest and ask them to share stories and discuss music, poetry, and culture from the working cowboy West and beyond. My guest today is Don Hedgpeth. Don is a writer, a poet, and a singer of old-time cowboy songs. I sat down with Don in Alpine, Texas during the Texas Cowboy Poetry Gathering to record this interview. I should say that towards the end of the interview, the room we were in began to fill up with people, so I apologize for the background noise. In the acknowledgments in his book of saddle songs, the great cowboy singer Don Edwards says this: "My life has been greatly enriched by the likes of Glenn Orland, Walt LaRue, Buck Ramsey, and Don Hedgpeth. They have almost single-handedly carried on the great tradition of old-time cowboy balladry." Here's Don Hedgpeth.
I had an old great aunt named Stella who was blind, and I think she was my maternal grandfather's sister. And she lived at Divine, and she sang songs when I was a little kid. And she sang Little Joe the Wrangler, and I can remember that song and her singing it. And and there must have been other songs, but that one stands out in my mind. And I probably knew the words just by osmosis, from being around her, because you'd always ask her to sing it. You didn't have TV or anything like that, and she was entertaining. And that would probably be it. My dad played the guitar. He tried to play the fiddle, and he did it poorly. And a fiddle played poorly is one of the scariest things in the world. We always kidded that if we misbehaved at home, Mother would say, "If you kids don't behave, I'm going to ask Daddy to play the fiddle when he gets home." So we wouldn't. But he didn't really play cowboy songs as much as he played country songs. But I remember he came home from World War II with a Gretsch guitar, the F-holes, archtop, the big steel metal tailpiece and all that. And I remember that guitar clear. My brother, who lives in Midlands, still has that guitar, and he still plays it. But music like that, the words to songs, we always had 78 records at the house, one of them great big record players, that you pulled out, and it was a piece of furniture. And I knew the words to songs. I didn't play music, though. I never, like a lot of kids, if your daddy does it, well, that's not anything you were interested in doing, and it was just later. About oh, 1964, I think, the summer of 64. In the spring of 64, I was at a NRA rodeo in Uvalde, and up in the slack, and ended up in a beer joint outside of town on the road to Del Rio, and met a guy who was from San Antonio, and he'd had a horse wrangling job the summer before in Montana, and he was getting married and wasn't going back. And I said, well, it was probably 11:30 or close to it, and I said, and I'd had beer to drink, and I said that I thought that I would like to have that job. I didn't have anything to do that summer except rodeo, and I'm getting kind of really way off now, but I cashed, went to the bartender and got $5 worth of quarters and dimes and stuff, and we got on the telephone, the payphone there in that bar, and he called that dude outfit in Montana in the middle of the night, and I applied for that job, and they said, the guy that hired me over the phone, he said, there's two basic responsibilities you have. Can you shoe horses and play the guitar? And I said, well, I told him I sure could. Well, I could shoe horses, and I knew the words to a lot of songs, but I couldn't play the guitar. So it was 2 weeks before I was supposed to get out of school at A&I in Kingsville and go up there. So I went to my dad. He got out that old Gretsch, and he taught me G, C, and D. And I've always said that I was phenomenal. My learning curve was dramatic for 2 weeks, and then it plateaued, and it's never gone any place up, since then. But I did that summer, and I knew, of course, from Aunt Stella, I knew Little Joe the Wrangler, but I knew When the Work's All Done This Fall, and Zebra Done, and all those songs, and that summer in Montana at 64, playing around the campfire for the dudes, and shoeing the horses in the morning and taking rides out and all that. That's really how it started. And I've always said, I think it was John Dillinger said, you can make more friends with a machine gun and a smile than you can with just a smile. And I think the same goes for guitars, and I bet you'd agree with that. It's a good way to make friends. And I've always been full of bullshit anyway, and telling stories, and if they're not true, they could have been and maybe should have been. And I've always appreciated that and what you did, because, you found some of those songs that I've seen in books before, but I never had heard, because I can't read music, so I never could figure out a melody. If you get that Austin Fife book, or something like that. And I said, boy, these are great words, but I have no clue what the tune would be. I guess I've almost learned all of mine from somebody else. I mean, I used to, wherever I'd be, there's usually somebody around a cow outfit or just people that we would congregate with and be friends with. There's somebody who sings or who knows or who has a favorite song, and you could learn. I used to trade songs with Buck all the time. I mean, Buck had never heard the Cowboy Fireman. And that's, if my album of greatest hits is just an album of greatest hit because of that song, But Buck had never heard that before. But I had never heard, as strange as it seems, I had never heard Round Up in the Spring till I heard Buck sing it. I met Buck and JB at the same time at that very first Lubbock deal when Alvin Davis started that thing. I can't remember what year that would have been, but I helped JB carry Buck's wheelchair up them steps they had to get up on that stage in the back, and I went and sat in the audience, and boy, I heard him sing that song, and it just that's maybe the most impressive moment that I can ever remember in my affinity for cowboy music. I said, boy, I've got to learn that song. And he taught to me that, and he kind of taught me an easier way to play loving tongue. Spanish is a loving tongue. You know, he played a bunch of chords in that, but you can kind of play it with G, C, and D, and just or play it in C, F, and G with an E minor, without all those subtleties that he had into it. But I've seen the Little Jack Thorpe book, and I thought that how cool that was. Little Joe the Wrangler's in there, and I read someplace that I think there's 13 songs in that little pamphlet that Jack Thorpe did. It was printed at Estancia, New Mexico in 1908. It's 2 years before John Lomax' Cowboy Songs book came out. Everybody always says John Lomax was the first book, but it was really Jack Thorpe. Jack Thorpe didn't have any music in there. There's no, tunes or anything like that. But it was said by somebody who wrote about Jack Thorpe that he wrote Little Joe the Wrangler down on a paper sack with a pencil stub in a camp someplace in New Mexico. And man, that sounds good to me. So, and I always thought that was cool, because that's one of the seminal songs.
All of us who sing old-time cowboy songs are always looking for songs that we've never heard, digging through old 78 records, collecting cowboy songbooks, and looking to those who have come before us. I asked Don to talk about the singers who have influenced him.
But the influences of, when you think about, and Jack Thorpe, I think, and Don Edwards attributes so much to Jack Thorpe. I mean, he was the minstrel. He was the guy. And in that class, I put Jack Thorpe first, but then I put Ramblin' Jack Elliott. And you and I both, love Ramblin' Jack Elliott. I mean, I just adore what he stands for and everything else. But Jack Thorpe, Ramblin' Jack, and then Don Edwards, and then Buck. It's not about show business, and it's not about performing. It's about that real tradition of the minstrel, what a minstrel really was, or a troubadour. The true troubadours were not Ernest Tubbs' backup band. The true troubadours were Jack Thorpe and Ramblin' Jack Elliott and Don Edwards and Buck Ramsey, who did it. And you're keeping it up, pal. You know the song that you do that I like the best still. It's Diamond Joe. I still like that one the best. That just sounds like 1898. It sounds like it when you do that, and I mean that as a compliment. A story that I was thinking about that goes with Little Joe the Wrangler, it just occurred to me that I don't know where I heard this story, but there was some place down in South Texas that a lot of those ranches are way the hell out in the brush, and this little kid was like 6 years old, and his family had never taken him to town till he was 6 years old. And they went to town finally, which would have probably been like Hebronville or, someplace, Falfurrious or Hebronville, someplace like that, Freer maybe. And they went to church, and they put him in a Sunday school class, and the Sunday school teacher said, "All right, class, now we'll sing songs. What songs do y'all want to sing?" And the little girl raised her hand, and she said, "Let's sing Jesus Loves Me." And they all sang Jesus Loves Me. He just sat there. He didn't know that song. And they said, "Okay, now," the teacher said, "what song would you like to sing now?" And another little child raised his hand and said, "Let's sing I Want to Be a Sunbeam for Jesus." And boy, they sang that, and the little boy from the brush didn't say a word. And the teacher was concerned about him being included in the group. And she said, "Well, son, is there a song that you'd like to sing?" And he said, "Do y'all know Little Joe the Wrangler?" and I thought, well, that kid was raised right after all.
From the earliest days of cowboy culture, cowboys have been writing and reciting poetry and singing songs about their lives. In this next segment, Don reflects on why we have cowboy poetry gatherings and on the cowboy renaissance of the past 30 years.
Well, you know, I've often thought, and I've talked about it in some of the shows that I've done out here, I've often thought about it. How come it's a cowboy poetry gathering and that's the only kind we hear about? Why? You know, it's not like they're astronauts or something. I mean, these famous individual heroes, and yet there's this whole genre of literature and film and music about cowboys. How come there's not a poetry gathering for plumbers or for barbers or for morticians or phlebotomists, you know, or how come it's just for cowboys? And they would have their own poems and their own music about barbering or about plumbing or pest control technicians. You know, I mean, they've got their own culture too, but they don't have poetry gatherings or music or anything like that. It's just, it is more tied to a myth than it is to reality. It's that, and a lot of it has to do, in the very beginning, if you think about D.J. O'Malley, who wrote When the Work's All Done This Fall as a poem. When you think about somebody like that, he was writing for the converted. You know, that's like preaching to the converted. And it got beyond that, and that song in particular is the first phenomenal thing that had found a wide audience. It's that illusion of freedom and a horseback hero, and all endorsed by the movies and the fiction that was written, which was not, you know, real, but it's just that longing to be free and to be a cavalier. And there's something about a figure of a man on horseback. I've said before, no kid on Christmas morning with a tricycle will ever feel as proud as a young kid on a horse, you know. It's just something about that that's almost innate. I do not believe in the old dictum that says there's something about the outside of a horse that's good for the inside of a man. Whoever said that never did much bronc riding, because that's just not true. The coolest thing, the thing that I associate with Elko and with Alpine, is that it still is valid. I mean, there's not less people. It's almost like there's more people showing up. I mean, you notice, wasn't that your experience yesterday? That there's actually more people now than there was before. And we're not singing to the converted anymore, though. How many cowboys did you see in your audiences? Very damn few. I mean, they know all of this old stuff, and it's just normal to them. But it's still that illusion that of that lone man on a horse by himself, self-sufficient, self-reliant, because those are all things that are missing in modern American psyche. What I think is really important is that you just can't, no pun intended, but you just can't beat a dead horse to death. And the fact that if I get bogged down in Little Joe the Wrangler and When the Work's All Done This Fall, everybody's going to get tired of it like I've gotten tired of it. And it needs to be fresh. And what Elko and what Alpine did is spawn this renaissance. I mean, at one time, cowboy music was popular, and it was commercially popular. It was on the radios, and it was Bing Crosby sing "Don't Fence Me In," you know, and things like that. But a renaissance needs to not only pay tribute to the tradition by keeping the tradition alive, it needs to enhance it and build on it. And people like Red Stegall and people like Ian Tyson took the tradition and went ahead and built on it and gave it new expression. That keeps it alive. It's just not enough to keep singing the same old ones. There's got to be new thoughts involved. That's what made me one of my proudest moments of anything that's ever happened is that first year that we went to Elko. I had not really tried my hand at poetry before, although I do write nonfiction. I'd not tried my hand at poetry, and I wrote a poem that I did in the little theater there at the headquarters. And Don Edwards came up to me after, and he said, "Would you care if I put that to music and made a song out of it?" And boy, did that make me proud. But it was about my experience. It's not just the retelling of the same old stories. And our base of support wants the myth more than they want the reality. There's the good real songs like The Bogus Brown that the Gillettes did so well together. I always said they sure sang that song better than I did, but it took two of them to do it, you know. But there's a vernacular in there. That's a genuine cowboy song. When you talk about a horse with rollers in his nose, you know, well, who in those audiences we played for yesterday or today has any idea what that means? One time I thought I would stop when I got to a term that was in the cowboy vernacular that people wouldn't understand. I'd explain that term, and then I'd take back up and go on with the song. But I found out that I didn't have that ability to do that if I stopped, like in tying a knot in the devil's tail. You know, they taking their running irons and a dog or two. I'd stop and I'd say, "Now, what a running iron?" And I'd say, "Explain that." But then I couldn't remember where I was in the song, and I had to go back and start over. And right after that, it would be another one about his old seagull tied up. I'd have to stop, and then I'd have to go back and start. Well, it took me an hour and a half to get through the song. But they don't have to understand it, I guess. They get if I had one observation to make about how fortunate I've been that people respond to what I do in these programs, it would be they don't have to understand what I'm talking about, but I hope my enthusiasm for the farm is contagious. They like better how I do what I do than what it is that I do, I think.
Would you feel like playing a song for me?
Boy, it's early in the morning. I'll try.
Play that Gibson.
Oh, I'd like to see what that sounds. When a fella's been a-straddle since he's big enough to ride, had to throw his saddle on most any old colored hide. Though it's something he's not proud of, but at different times it's known. If he's ever done much riding, he's at different times got thrown. Now the boys start out together for the roundup one fine day. You're due to sling your leather on some little wall-eyed bay. He stands still with legs all spraddled, and his eyes show lots of white. And you kick him and you cuss him, but his hide is puckered tight. He swells to beat the nation while you're pulling up the slack. Keeps an elevation at the saddle and the back. Keeps a jumping and a pawing, and he strikes when you get near. And you cuss him and you fight him till you get him by an ear. Then your left hand grabs a saddle and you catch a stirrup too. He's trying to swing a straddle like a woolly buckaroo. Stay with him, shout some feller, but you know it's hope forlorn. But you show that you ain't yeller till you choke the saddle horn. Then the boys all yell together, fit to make a feller sick. Hey, you shorthorn, drop that leather, fan his fat and ride him slick. But you're upside down a-flying and your spurs begin to slip. There's no further use of trying, 'cause the horn flies from your grip. You feel a vague sensation as upon the ground you roll, like a violent separation twixt your body and your soul. You roll and hit the wagon where you pant and gasp for breath. Something grabs your middle like the icy hand of death. They all offer you prescriptions for the grip and for the croup. Give you descriptions of how to do the loop-de-loop. They all say you beat the circus or a hoochie-coochie dance, mopping up the canyon with the bosom of your pants. Then you get up on your trotters and you find it's hard to stand, and the landscape kinda totters and your collar's full of sand. Lots of fellas will give prescriptions of how a bad horse should be rode, but few that give descriptions of them times that they got throwed. Well, that's pretty rough.
That's great.
Pretty rough.
Thanks for doing that. Thanks for taking the time to...
You're my pal, Andy. I appreciate what you do, pal. Good luck.
All right, folks, that's it for this episode. I'd like to thank Don Hedgpeth for taking the time to visit with me. If you'd like to find out more about Don, I would recommend picking up one of his books. You can find them in lots of places, but I would suggest starting at Amazon.com. If you'd like to find out more about me and this show, you can go to AndyHedges.com. If you'd like to help me keep this show going, you can make a donation on the website, or you could leave a review on the iTunes store, or you could simply tell someone about the show, maybe a friend who you think would enjoy these stories. If you'd like to send me a message or a question, or maybe tell me a story, you can reach me at Andy@AndyHedges.com, and I'd love to hear from you. Thank you for listening to Cowboy Crossroads.